Well, good morning and welcome back to the Fly Media Podcast. We're here shooting our first episode of 2025. Super excited to be here. I've got Manny Ruiz here with me today. He's another Bay Area pilot, and Manny actually flew out from his airport, Reed Hillview, which is what, 25 or so nautical miles?
About 25 nautical miles. That's about right. Yeah.
Welcome, Manny. Thank you for coming.
Hey, it's great to be here. It's great to have me here. I appreciate it. Uh, first I didn't realize the first podcast of the year. So hey, that's something, huh?
Big first.
All right.
Are you a member of a flying club? Like, where do you rent after now that you have your ticket?
Yeah, so I did my training with Tradewinds Aviation. Now they're owned by American School or something like that. But pretty good school, great planes. Everything's new. They got G1000s, 172s, G1000s, and they got six packs as well. I mainly did six packs because I wanted to be a little old school, but great school, and it's a flying club. So there's a bunch of planes that are available. I think there's about 10 or 12 in the fleet. So there's almost always something available as long as I book it in time. But yeah, I fly with them for now, and I'm going to figure out what I want to do long term. I have dreams of owning something at some point, just having one thing that I fly, but it'll come with time.
Awesome. I can't agree more. Like the consistency of just flying like the same plane every time would be nice, right?
Yeah.
Every plane, even if it's the same model, they're all just a little bit different.
Yeah, and when you're flying, I mean, I think there's so much to do with comfort. Like you have to be comfortable, and I'm usually not comfortable, at least for the first 5 minutes, and then I kind of like settle in. But I want to just feel comfortable in a plane. Luckily, the plane I flew today, I've flown it a bunch. I've probably flown it the most, and I've taken it on the longest trips, so I do feel pretty comfortable in that plane. But there's something about owning something that is just a little different. So that'll definitely be in the books.
I'm sure that's everybody's goal. I know I myself am interested in airplane ownership. If you had an aircraft that, for ownership, what would it be? Like, what would you be interested in?
When I look at a plane, that's almost like the first stat I look at. That's the first spec. I'm like, so what's the useful load? Like, can I take the full family? Can I take my friends? I've got some friends, they're all my age and, probably weigh about 200 pounds or so. And so you want to be able to take everyone, maybe some golf clubs, things like that. So yeah, useful load is like one of the first things I look at. But the Cirrus is, of course, that's the dream plane. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with a Cirrus. I mean, it's a beautiful looking plane. It's a low wing. I'd probably want to end up in a low wing long term. And I think the parachute would make my wife feel good, but she's gotten more comfortable with me flying. So I think she's been on some long trips with me now, so she feels a little bit safer. But yeah, it's the peace of mind.
Definitely.
But I've heard different opinions about the series. I haven't flown one yet. I know having the left side seems kind of weird.
The little joystick.
I was flying with a CFI, and his dad he's an airline pilot with tens of thousands of hours, and he wanted to buy a plane. He was looking at a Cirrus, and he decided not to because he said it felt like a video game. So it just didn't feel like the true getting the kind of seat of your pants flying. He didn't feel that in a Cirrus. So I mean, I don't know how much I would care about that, but it's a pretty sleek plane. It's fast. It's got great useful load. Um, and yeah, I mean, I want to be able to take my family. I have a family. I got two boys. So I want to be able to take the four of us. I want pretty good range. I go to Mexico pretty often. So at some point I want to fly to Mexico. Not straight there, but hey, you got to stop before you get to the border regardless for customs. But I'd like to make it in two legs. That'd be nice. But you have to do that in a 172 is kind of hard. You can't go too far into Mexico.
I think I'm running into the same issue in the 172. The useful load of the ones that I've been flying is like 879 pounds, which I'm 200 pounds. I just assume every adult, for safety, I just say you're 200 pounds. Make it easy. I don't need to ask you. I don't need to check with a woman unless you look that much bigger than me. I'm saying you're 200 pounds. So that puts us at 600 for three people. Full fuel which is 50 gallons in the plane that I've been flying the most, 300 pounds. We're already at 9, so we're 2,100. We're 21 pounds overweight already with no baggage, none of my cameras, none of my GoPros. It sounds like this trip is canceled already.
Yeah, 172 is limiting. The first bay tour I did, I wanted to learn how to do a bay tour. So I did it with my CFI. I want to bring my son along with me because my son likes to fly with me. My son he's just turned 14. His birthday was a couple days ago, actually.
Happy belated. What's his name?
His name is Santiago. Santi, everybody calls him Santi. He has autism and an intellectual disability, but loves to fly. something. Like he's not afraid. He was afraid, I think, the first time, but he loves it. So I brought him along with me, and I thought, okay, there's the three of us in a 172. It should be no problem. But the CFI I flew with, I won't name names. He's about 250, 260 around there. So first plane we had, plane was it was to the tabs, so it had full fuel. And we did the weight and balance. And my son is, he's built like me, but he's tall, so he's about 120, probably like that. But we couldn't fly it. We were overweight, so we had to go from plane to plane, checking the fuel to see if we can find something that worked. And finally, we had to wait for someone who flew in, who had just landed, and fuel was much lower. Like, all right, now we can go. But that's what the 172 does. It's a little bit too limiting. Great for training, but great for these trips that I take. But long term, something with good useful load is really important.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking, especially with, wanting to have kids. It'll be fine when they're younger. And I've seen this with other pilots. SoCal Flying Monkey. He's like my favorite aviation content creator. He's a cinematographer professionally, right? So his stuff is, in my eyes, untouchable. His daughters were little when he got into flying and got planes. But at a certain point, they got too old, too tall, it got uncomfortable. So then he ended up buying a Cherokee 6. And that can fit a truck. If it fits, it flies. 1,400 pounds of useful load, 6 seats. He's got the nice club seating so the people in back can play cards, kick back. I'm I'm very interested in something like that.
Yeah, that's a great long haul plane. He's got some great content. I saw one where he had issues with oxygen at the altitude they were flying, and there was like fires going on, and just the modifications he's made to that plane. That's a fantastic plane. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think getting your family to embrace this hobby of ours is important, or else
Right.
it could snuff it out real quick. Because I know when I got back into this, first thing I did was have a conversation with my wife, and I'm like, "Are you okay with it? Are you going to participate in this with me? Because if you don't, like, don't know if I want to just do it alone. Like,
Right.
it's great to meet folks like you, and this is awesome. And like, I really want to kind of meet other pilots in the community, and would love to do some different trips with other pilots. But by default, I want to fly with my family. I want to fly with my wife. I want to take a weekend trip, and she's got to be okay with it. She's got to be comfortable with it. And if not, it really kind of takes away a lot from the hobby. So luckily, she's embraced it, and she'll tell you, she'll be the first to tell you it scares me, but she does it, and that's what matters. And there's some flights that she's very comfortable with, no problem. This is a breeze, loves it. We flew out to Davis for my buddy's 50th birthday. That was a breeze, no wind issues, a little bit of narrow runway, but it was a breeze. I had a good landing first time around, so she felt like this is great. This is super cool. We come here, we don't have to deal with Bay Area traffic, and it's great. But other times when we went out to Petaluma, we did a bay tour on the way back. I decided to get a little bit dicey on the way back and go through all the Charlie airspace through Oakland and then over Hayward, instead of coming out to the hills, which is actually a more scenic flight. But I kind of wanted to do something different. But it was constant revectoring. I had to fly over Hayward at 900 feet, and then there's heavies flying coming into Oakland. It was dicey. It was dicey. Even for me, I was like, man, I'm all over the place. And, I think when look at her, and I could just see the fear in her eyes.
She's like, don't ever do this to me again.
And when we landed, I was like, you all right? And she's like, that was an experience. So that one wasn't very fun for her, but she's embracing it. So, having the family be a part of it, not having to exclude people from the family because the plane, doesn't have the useful load. So it's a really important part for folks like us who do this for a hobby.
I couldn't agree with that more. If the family doesn't fly or your wife isn't into it, now it's like it's a hobby that almost creates a divide because
Yeah.
if you want to go flying on a Sunday afternoon and you're both off work, now she's like, well, you're choosing your flying hobby over
Yeah.
me again. And she's not
Yeah.
necessarily wrong. I started this when we bought this house about 2 years ago, is when I started flight training. She's like, how are you going to pay for the house and flight training and blah, blah, blah. It's going to be expensive and I know nothing about it. Now I mentioned flying and she lights up and she's like, so where are we going? This is going to be great.
Nice. Yeah, no, those types of experiences, right? Like that's what aviation opens up to you. Like it's a whole other world out there that unfortunately not a lot of people get access to, but we're fortunate enough to have access to it. And there's even though there's been a closure of several GA airports over the years, and there's more coming, there's still a ton of them, and there's these great little communities at all these airports. There's these great diners we were talking about right at these airports, and just experiences that you wouldn't otherwise have, and like places I probably wouldn't otherwise go to. But hey, there's an airport there. Hey, why not? We
Mhm.
were talking about Mendocino earlier. The trip from San Jose to Mendocino with no traffic is like almost 4 hours,
Right.
right? And there's going to be some traffic no matter when you go in Bay Area. There's going to be some traffic, so
Mhm.
that's a pretty long trip. That's an hour and a half
Right.
in a 172. I mean,
Easy.
you can do a day trip if you wanted to. So it does open up a lot of places for you, and that experience is pretty incredible. But you're right, it's nothing like commercial flying, not at all. I mean, you feel every bump, good or bad, right? That's what spooks some people, but
Yeah.
I love that feel. Like it kind of gives me the feel of like, I'm getting feedback from where I am. So,
Yeah.
I take that in and I can do something with it. I can adjust how I'm flying and whatnot. But it's not for everyone, but it's certainly for me. Um, but yeah, very different than any other kind of travel experience for sure.
Without a doubt. You sound like me. Um, I think you misspoke when you said that flying is a hobby. It's not a hobby. This shit is an obsession. It's a passion. It's something that consumes at least 50% of your thoughts. And I'm going to put it at around 50 because you're married. We'll give your wife the actual 50. But it's just, I can't explain it.
Yeah, the only thing I do, and the only thing I read about, the only real YouTubes and podcasts I follow is all aviation. It's all aviation. Like I play golf, and I like to play golf every so often, but
You're not
I
watching anybody play golf.
I'm not really. Like I'm reading about aviation. I'm reading magazines, books to some extent, and a lot of podcasts, a lot of videos, and just learning. Just like, what am I going to do next? But yeah, you're right. It is a bit of an obsession.
Once you get bitten by that bug, it doesn't matter when or where it bites you. You're in for some trouble.
Yeah. My story's been a little bit up and down with aviation because I started when I was about 28 or so. This is over 20 years ago. Uh, my wife and I were married, dinks, dual income, little bit of spare money, no kids at the time, and uh, always wanted to be a pilot. So I said, "Hey, I'm gonna try it," and I started doing it. I got about halfway through it, got to my solo stage, but then the family started, so we started to focus on family, and I said, "All right, I'll put it aside for now. We're gonna start our family, and then I'll come back to it at some point." But I didn't for many years. I mean, it took 20 years for me to get back into it. And I was thinking a little bit more about that. Like most of the time when people ask me like why, I say, well, life took over, kids obviously consume you.
Yeah.
We had one, 6 years later we had our second. Um, but there was a lot of like anxiety that I dealt with as well. And I remember for all the years in between, passing by the airport, driving past it because it's not far from where I live, and not really being excited about it. More so like, I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore because I remember how much anxiety it gave me. And I think at the time, those years, I was kind of dealing with more anxiety with work and things like that. But now I've gotten to this point, midlife now, that I feel like I have that more under control. And it's still there. Like it's still there. Like I was like nervous this morning about this flight. Probably more nervous about having this conversation with you than the flight. But it's still there. But I can manage it now, and it just feels good to be able to overcome that as well
Yeah.
and challenge yourself and be like, you know what, that used to scare me for a long time because there's a lot of times I had flights when I was training 20 years ago that we had some dicey situations and it was scary. And uh, you're not letting that scare me off, right? And coming back to it. So that feels good. That feels good. And now it kind of feels like, hey, if I can handle that, I can handle a lot.
Midlife crisis, people buy a Corvette or a sports car. Manny got his pilot's license. That's awesome.
Every time I've had plenty of people tell me that, oh, this is your midlife. It's like, well, I started this in 20 when I was 20 years old, so I'm just continuing it.
You didn't become a statistic. You're not one of those 75% of people that don't finish. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
It took you a little while to come back around to it, but hey, you did it when it was the right time for you and the family. So that's huge. That's important, and you're enriched by it. You know what I mean? Like you have a glow about you.
It's an element of my life that I'm just it just brings so much. It's very rewarding. It just gives you this sense of self worth, almost like again, not in a cocky way or arrogant way. I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just decided to do something that anyone could have decided to
That's
do
right.
with the means. Again, I'm fortunate enough to have the means, but um, yeah, it does feel good, especially after a flight like this. Going somewhere new, pulling that off. Feels great.
That's it. Perfect way to have to spend your Sunday. For me, if I can, I want to start spending my Sundays flying to brunch.
Right now, I'm working on my high performance rating on a 182. So part of it is useful load, right? I want to take the full family.
Yeah.
I want my son is a big boy. He's taller than I am. He's like 215, and he's in a 182 he fits nicely. In the 172, it's pretty cramped. So it's been really interesting to start to learn the 182. I think it's probably a lot simpler than some people seem. I know I've read all about the constant speed prop and understanding how it works and everything, and it's very complicated when you really want to try to understand how it works. But to fly it's actually not as complex. Yeah, it's not as complex, and I think part of the issue there is overthinking that flight. But so far I've only done one flight so far. We've had dealing with weather issues, right? But I should be able to knock it out in a couple more flights, and then I'll have access to that plane. So if I do want to take the whole family somewhere, I at least have access to it. But really the point is learning, because like you said, like you have to have some kind of goals as a hobby or an obsession. You still have to have some kind of goals, or else I got to a point where after I got my license, I was like, well, where do I fly? Like,
Right.
where do I go? I just want to fly on my own. What do I work on? So
Yeah.
it takes, like, you either have to be very diligent about that planning, or you got to set some goals for you. So, I had a whole like set of goals for 2024. I accomplished probably half of them, not all of them. One of them was to get that high performance endorsement, and I started it 2024, but I didn't finish it. I wanted to hit 10 different airports in 2024. I hit 6. But I set some goals for myself. So high performance for sure. I want to do tail wheel. Tail wheel is I'm sure it's really difficult, but everyone I've spoken to have told me tail wheel will make you the best pilot. So just stick and rudder, like really hone your skills. If you can master that, coming back to a tricycle is pretty straightforward. So the instrument, I think I want to start playing around with instrument approaches.
Yeah.
Just start learning how to do that on my own. But I want to wait till I can really commit to it to go full on, because I know it's quite complex, and I want to be able to just put my mind to it and do it the way I did my private pilot. So my private pilot, I took 6 months off of work. And it wasn't that I took that time off for my private pilot. It's just I left a job, and then at that point I was like, I really want to fly. So I said, I'm just going to fly. I'm going to start now. I'm going to get this done, and then I'll worry about getting a job later. So it was a good way to just stay focused. It was a nice break in my career. I've been in tech for 25 plus years. So it was a really nice breather.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic. So, I mean, I don't know if I need to take like 3 months off or something like that to get an instrument, but I want to be able to focus on it at least for a bit.
That's awesome. I think I'm planning on doing my ground school for that online, a few basic flights to kind of understand, the approaches and kind of some of like the checklist and just the way of going about things. And once I have a little bit of grasp on that, I just want to do a 10-day course and bang it out. Just 9 to 5 for 10 days and knock it out. And I've got a CFI in one of the flying clubs that I'm in.
Yeah, no, that's the way to do it. And that's certainly something I want in my back pocket as well, because I've canceled a lot of flights due to weather. Not that, you can fly in any kind of weather, but it opens up a lot more. I had a dicey situation flying out to was trying to go to Camarillo Airport, where the marine layer was just enough to cover the airport. Everything else was clear. Like I could have shot right through that if I had an instrument. So it definitely opens things up for you. It just makes you more proficient. Probably just gives you so many more tools in your tool bag, right? So.
Oh my goodness, acronyms. Oh. If you're not good at memorizing acronyms, I suggest you get some flashcards or something, especially if you're going to start your instrument rating. So hopefully I get ground done by end of next month.
Yeah, the definite acronym hell there. Um, I've kind of ignored a lot of the instrument stuff. Like whenever I see podcasts or I'm flipping through the magazine, I see WAS and RNAV approach. I'm just like I don't know what that is, so I'm just gonna ignore it. But now I've started to embrace it a little bit. So now I'm like reading it and trying to understand it. I don't fully understand. I think it's just like everything in aviation. Like you just have to be open to it and just have very much a learning mindset and just kind of open your mind, try to figure it out. It's a lot of critical thinking, which is really, really great. That's what I love about it. The amount of critical thinking that we have to do on every flight. I mean, the flight here is such a simple flight, but there's a lot of critical thinking I have to do coming into a new airport. So
You say it's simple. You fly in and under and in between two very busy Charlies, and you're still under the Bravo, right? You guys are still under SFO's Bravo where
yep,
you are.
yep,
That's a extremely busy airspace.
it is.
For those of you out there that may not be from the Bay, the San Francisco Bravo airspace is one of the busiest in the country. Within that, you've got two very busy Charlies in San Jose and Oakland. Both are international, all three are international airports, so it's extremely busy. And then you have how many more GA airports within 10, 15 miles?
Oh God, there's got to be, I'd say like 6 or 7 at least. I mean, you've got Reed, where I fly out of, you got Hayward, you've got San Carlos, you've got Palo Alto.
Right.
All of those in the South Bay, really.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's all these up here in the North Bay. So, yeah, there's a ton. The airspace is complex, and I think we're kind of spoiled by that. Learning in this airspace really makes us much better pilots. Yeah, I talked about the Bay Tour, doing a Bay Tour just to fly around Golden Gate Bridge, which is just a phenomenal experience, right? Flying around the Bay Bridge, flying around, doing a turns around point around Alcatraz Island is just insane. And I feel so fortunate to I've done it now 4 times. But just to get up there and back, that airspace it's crazy. It's pretty wild. It keeps you on your toes for sure. But when I fly there, I feel like I can go into most other airspaces and it's not too bad.
Right.
And this is what happened to me when I went to Camarillo. So I tried to go to Camarillo. I ended up, so Camarillo in Southern California in Ventura County. My sister and brother-in-law live in Thousand Oaks nearby. So I was going to fly in there. They're going to pick me up. We're going to go to a Dodger game. Big Dodger fan here living in the Bay Area, which is not very popular. But it is what it is. But always dreamed of flying down and and catching a Dodger game and coming back like that. That was one of like my motivating factors for being a pilot, because when you're in the Bay Area, you get to see all the Giants fans going with their home fans and having this great time. And we don't have that experience as a fan of you're a Yankees fan, so you got to go to the Yankee Stadium to get that experience, right? So being able to fly down and do it was always a dream, and to do it with my son too. So my son and I did that flight. The plan was to go into Camarillo. Um, in hindsight, I probably should have been a little bit safer, but I planned for alternatives.
Yeah.
And there is in the summer the marine layer tends to come in, but it usually clears out by afternoon, and it's pretty consistent. And I called the airport before. They told me that, hey, it's like it clears out by noon. It almost always clears out. So was counting on that and kept checking the weather as we're heading down, and nope, still IFR, and finally got to a point where like, all right, we're not gonna be able to make it. Let's assuming what I'm seeing here is accurate on my iPad. So we actually got there, and literally the marine layer was just enough to cover the airport, just enough. Everything else was clear to the west, sorry, to the east. But I knew I couldn't make it in. So my alternative was Van Nuys.
Yep.
And I had already studied a bit coming into Van Nuys. I'd already prepped for it somewhat, talked to people, and they're like, hey, it's a great airport. It's a very classic, historic GA airport.
Big and busy.
And very busy. And in LA airspace. So you start to get Burbank and Whiteman, and you have like a lot of complex airspace there. But I'm like, I'm used to complex airspace, so I think I can handle it. And sure enough, like we did, I diverted to Van Nuys and came in a little dicey. There was Southwest airplane coming. The air traffic control had to ask me twice to hurry up and get down quick. And I'm like, I'm descending as fast as I can here. And I heard the Southwest pilot say like, no, I've got him. I was about 1,000 feet below, and he crossed right over me, but came in and pretty uneventful landing. And the radio work was to me was second nature, because the radio work that we have to do here in the Bay Area, it's challenging when you're going through all this different airspace.
Yeah, more so where you live than me, because I'm just outside of the Bravo shells, and most of my flights are either south or east, so I never really have to get into it. But going to Half Moon Bay the other day, I don't think I've ever had to switch and change radio frequencies that much in a 26-minute flight.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is the experience that we get here in the Bay Area. And you're right, and I think there are certainly times where you should pull back and not go into some of those situations if you truly don't feel like you can handle it. But it is rewarding when you're able to do it, especially in a situation like that. It feels good when you get down and you're like, I was able to manage that. And it was not easy. And when you explain that to a non-pilot, you just blow their mind. You just
Oh,
blow
yeah.
their mind, because they're like, I can't even
Yeah.
understand that level of complexity. Even to pilots, when you tell them, they're like, yeah, that's pretty dicey. But yeah, that's that situation there. You're right. I mean, just coming here, I mean, it was 4 radio changes. I mean, I was on, takeoff on Reed, NorCal departure, then NorCal approach, and then they just let me go. And I was like, oh, I thought you were going to stick with me,
Right.
uh, and then over to Concord. But that to me is normal. Like, to me, that's typical. If I'm flying in the Bay Area, that's pretty typical. So for me, I'm listen for it, listen for my change. So it's not too hard. But when I went to Half Moon Bay the first time, I had a similar situation. It was pretty busy, and I almost decided to quit. I had my son with me as well, so a little bit more careful when I
Yeah.
have my son with me. And I was probably about 7 miles out, and I saw quite a bit of traffic, and I was ready to pull that U-turn and just go right back to San Jose. And I said, I'm just going to wait a little bit. And then it just kind of opened up a little bit, like couple of them landed and were full stops. So I'm like, all right, I can do this. I can do this. And it's a little tricky approach when you're coming in. I forget the runway number, but you got to come in
You've got
over the
30
hills.
coming in over the water, and then the other would, I guess, be 12 coming. If you're coming
Yeah.
south, it's 12, north 30. 30 is what we landed on the other day.
Yeah, so I was doing left traffic on 1-2,
Yeah.
and you got to come over the hills, and you get pretty low over those hills, and
Yeah.
it gets a little bumpy. So that's that approach, especially coming in on 45. Like,
Mhm.
you could come straight in. It's a untowered airport, so you could do it. You're not supposed to do that, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to come in on 45, but I kind of like, I narrowed that 45 because I just didn't want to be over those hills so low. So it was a little bit dicey for sure. But
Yeah.
again, getting down, I just felt a sense of accomplishment. And then you walk over to the diner there in Half Moon Bay, and you just have a nice, yeah, you have a nice little meal there, and fantastic.
That approach is beautiful, isn't it?
It's gorgeous.
Oh
It's
man,
gorgeous. Especially in the winter. I think in the winter it's best, because it's usually clear. In the summer, it's always you always get the marine layer.
I'm a big advocate of flying over midfield, especially at non-towered airports. Obviously, I fly over midfield so I can look and see who's in the pattern, hear them over the radio. Right, give me a little more time.
Yeah, that safety is you're getting that sight of where everything is super super critical, because there's so much going on. Like, you just
Right.
just like I mentioned to you earlier, coming in here today, I lost sight of
Yeah.
the runway. You got 2 parallel runways, and I was looking at the wrong one for a second.
Yeah.
And luckily I caught it fast enough to not to become a statistic, or
Yeah.
get in trouble or something.
Without question. And then, like I said, that runway 19er right here at Concord Airfield is 150 feet wide. It's a massive airport, but 19er left, the parallel is about 75 feet wide. And when you're comparing the two, looking from one to the next, 19er left looks like a taxiway in
Yeah,
comparison.
it
Like,
does. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, you read about some of these incidents. There's times where I read of some of these incidents, I think, like, how could someone make that mistake? You're thinking that in your head. Um, I don't know if you heard of the Harrison Ford incident. Harrison Ford is a private pilot, and he landed on a taxiway. I forgot where this was, but he made a mistake, and he mistook the taxiway for. You would think in your head, like, how can you make that mistake? But then when you come to a place like here, Concord,
yeah.
just like you said, you've got a very wide runway, and you've got a bunch of different taxiways everywhere. It really is a lot of spaghetti down there. So
Oh, yeah.
trying to make sense out of everything, you can see how in the moment, you can make that mistake. It's definitely something you can do. So it's just about paying attention to those details, and makes it being safe and conservative when you fly.
Definitely. Definitely. And that's a huge PSA to all pilots. I mean, no matter you have, very few hours or you've got thousands of hours. Safety first, pay attention, double check things because when you don't and you end up in the bad situation, you're either going to end up with a story to tell about, oh my gosh, I coulda, shoulda, or someone's going to tell that story for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's the big channel on YouTube? The guy that does reviews of
Oh,
every accident. I'm talking. He kind of sits in like
yes.
he sits in the almost in the dark. He's
Yes.
got like a little table. Channel's amazing. I watch a whole bunch of stuff when it comes up, and I review things. I think it's pilot review or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's it.
That will kind of get rid of any bravado or hubris that any pilot has. You go watch a few of those, you go, oh my gosh, that happens to people that are just like me, or they have more time than I do. They fly bigger planes than I do. How did this happen?
Yeah.
If it can happen to them, it can definitely happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, and as pilots, like I think it's I mean, this might apply to other professions, but definitely for us, we spend a lot of time studying accidents. And like that's why channels like that are so popular. I get obsessed with reading about accident, but like I have to do it in spurts because it can be really dark. It's really dark. I mean, there's stories behind these, there's families, tragic stories. So there's only so much of that you can take in without it starting to like impact your mental health. So you gotta just balance it, but you do that to learn. So you're just constantly thinking about, hey, if that situation happens, yeah, you've at least already thought about it at some point in time, ideally. Like hopefully if you do encounter some kind of situation, you've either seen or read about it and thought about it. So some of those thoughts have already gone through your mind.
Right.
Definitely help in a situation which I think every pilot does as long enough they're going to be in some kind of situation that they have to deal with. But it is morbid. It's a bit morbid sometimes. Like there's times where I'm telling my wife about some of these things, and she's like, "I don't want to hear about that." Right? Like, I know, but it's really fascinating to me to learn about it.
Accidents and fears and things really happen. So you've got to kind of, pay attention.
Yeah.
There's no need to make, a tragic mistake that someone else made when you could have learned from it.
Yeah, I heard a saying once. There's something like I'll probably butcher this, but it was something like intelligence is when you learn from your mistakes, but wisdom is when you can learn from other people's mistakes. And I think that's what we're doing when we're analyzing these accidents or these incidents.
Hmm.
You're trying to learn from those because like when I'm in that situation, I want to know what I would have done. A lot of times I read some of those, I'm like, I don't know what I would have done in that situation.
Same.
And you sure they already asked myself, I what
What's the play right?
what should I have done? What would I have done? So it is a lot of getting back to that critical thinking,
Yeah.
constantly thinking, staying on your toes, not relaxing at all. Like this is, I mean, there's times where when you fly, you can relax. Like you're on a long cross country, sure, and you're still every so often checking your instruments and making sure you know where you're going to land, you have an engine out. But most of the time, you got to be on your toes. And yeah, I got to take it for granted.
Most definitely. So let's backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about your training. What would you say was like the biggest challenge for you or your biggest struggle during your PPL training?
Landings, for sure. There's like everyone's.
Oh yeah.
Um, landings are one of those things that you feel like you got to figure it out. And then all of a sudden you get smacked in the face like, oh man, you just bounce 1, 3 times. You're like, I thought I had this figured out.
Right, right.
So that certainly felt like, even to this day, right? If I'm not flying this morning, right? I haven't flown for just under a month, 3 weeks ago. I'm like, before I come out here, to a new airport, a new runway, a complex runway, I'm gonna take a few in the pattern, and get done. And I greased the first line. That was great. I'm like, I'll do another one, and the second one, not so great. I said, at least I got a bill, I got that out of my system,
Right.
and then headed over here. But landings are definitely the one thing that you probably put the most thought into, and we probably all could think, I mean, a lot of it is mental more than physical. I think the thing that I feel like the thing that helped it click for me most was not taking control of the plane, not letting the plane, control you. Like just a lot of times I was kind of just going for the ride. I was kind of going through it, but not really in control. And I remember my CFI once showed me like, let me show you what taking control of planes like. And it was just jostling.
Yeah, yeah.
Get on the center line, get the nose to the position you want to. And I was like, don't worry about smooth. Like you don't have passengers. You don't worry about your passengers. Like you want to be safe. You want to do the right thing. So once I kind of that clicked in place, I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna grab this thing and put it on the center line. And a lot of times I'd start to flare and I start to drift off, and I just kind of let it, like, I just want to land safely. I let it kind of drift off the center line. But now it's like, now it starts to drift. No, get into position, comfortable doing that. And I think that really helps me. I would not use the word master for sure, but feel more comfortable with landing safely.
Agreed. I still bounce from time to time, and when I do, I one get pissed off. Two, I go, okay, I never want to walk away from the plane or an airport that I visited with my last landing being a bad one.
Yeah.
So I always make sure I leave after a good one. All right, cool. I'll go home and put down a safe landing at home. Great. Um, because I don't want that, like, that'll eat away at me
Yeah.
personally. I'll just be
Negative,
frustrated
negative
about it and be like, oh yeah, I'll think about it the whole rest of the day. Before my next flight, like, oh, I suck again. Like, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, but you have to have short memory sometimes with the negative thoughts,
Right.
not with the learning things. Like, what did that teach me? Like, what did I do wrong there? Like that, you have to keep in your mind. So, just on my flight, like I tell you, that second landing was not a great one, and I could have stayed in the third valve. Said, no, I'm gonna come out here. And my landing here was, I wish you filmed it, man. It was like one of my better landings. I was
Oh,
like,
that's
I'm really
awesome.
happy with it. But because I had a short memory, I'm like, I'm not gonna
Huh?
start to self doubt. It's like, oh, maybe I can't land well. Maybe I got lucky on the first one. I was like, nope. I know how to land this thing. I know how to land well. That was about, I know exactly what I did wrong on the second one. Like, I got a little slow on the speed. It came down a little hard. But I knew exactly what I did wrong. So it's like, put it behind you, and then you focus on your fundamentals. And as long as you're focused on your fundamentals every time, and again, another thing, don't take for granted. Uh, yeah, trust yourself.
Without question. Oh, that was my biggest struggle in landings. I was so horrible for so long. It took me, I don't know, I'd fly consistently and get good at landings. Then something would happen, like life would come up. I wouldn't fly for a month and it would go back to being the shits. Like I'd never landed a plane before in my life.
Yeah.
And I got so frustrated. That was at the point where I was like, you know what, maybe I'm just going to stop doing this. I was like, no, I want to get out and see the world, right? Like I'm tired of being in the pattern. I've done a few cross countries, but like, let's go see the world at these unique altitudes. So I've been very fortunate to do so. I really want to take a mountain flying course. I think that's one of my next steps as well, because flying in the mountains is not as, a normal person would just think, oh, it's going to be a little bit bumpy, or you want to fly in the middle of the valleys. Well, what if flying in the middle of the valley, something happens, you need to turn around, but there's not enough space for you to make that turn without hitting the mountain?
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent. You're right. I mean, you can't just kind of just go into mountains and be like, oh, I just got to fly a little bit higher, or, or go to the valleys. Like, no, it is a complex scenario. Yeah, I've heard a lot of horror stories of flights in there. But it's also something like, one last flight you want to do up to Lake Tahoe. That's another dream flight for me.
Yeah,
From there, it's such a beautiful airport, such a beautiful place.
right.
Absolutely, absolutely on my list of flights to do, but I'm not gonna rush into that one. Like, there's different mountain courses that
Hmm.
you can take. There's, I mentioned Jason Miller earlier. He does a multi-day camping
Yeah, I've seen that.
type. Yeah, I almost did it.
He's Finer Points, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He does a lot with SoCal Flying Monkey. Also, they're
Yep.
buddies, and yeah, he's like an affiliate with him. No, it's
Yeah.
awesome. I've seen that.
It's like a multi-day, like, it's like there's around, there's flying, there's survival skills, which is like,
It's
you
awesome.
go down the mountains, like, you gotta know how to survive, and ways for people to find you and things like that. Seems like a really cool, like, multi-day course. But it's that may be overkill for some folks. But you definitely can't take that lightly. You're right.
True.
Flying could be really tricky.
Right, but it's things that you may not even think about, right? Like if something goes wrong, like, oh, I landed safely, but now you're stuck some random place.
Yeah.
Help is miles and hours of hiking to get to you, if that's even possible. So that's actually a really good thing. Plus, I feel like with people like Jason Miller and at that level, they build community. So like going and taking this course, you're meeting other pilots who maybe from different parts of the state or country, but you're maybe planning a really cool flying trip somewhere. You hit that guy up from the class and he's like, oh yeah, I'm in. So it's about building community,
yeah.
meeting other pilots, bonds, shared experience. I think that's extremely valuable.
Absolutely, yeah, because there's few people that really understand the nuances of what we do. Like, I can talk to a friend or whatnot about what I'm doing, but you can only get so technical,
Right.
really understanding it. But to talk to another pilot about it, it's just another level. So the communities are important. It's definitely something, again, why I'm sitting here doing this. I'm hoping to meet more folks, just to chat with,
Yeah.
learn from, and hopefully fly with at some point. Maybe take some adventures with. So
You have a trip coming up with the wife that weekend, but I'm starting to plan these Bay Area fly-ins just to go to different airports to have lunch and meet other pilots and really get more social. So I hope, you can make the next one in February and a few after that. Hey, you'll be able to hit your 10 airports this year,
For sure.
That's one way to do it.
That sounds like fine. Me.
What traits do you think are important for like a student pilot to have to get through some of those struggles and persevere some of that doubt that may set in when you're struggling with something?
Great question. I was going to mention you talked about the landing and starting to have that self-doubt. The majority of students that I've talked to have had hit that period at some point. I mean, you plateau, your skills aren't getting better, and then all of a sudden, like something clicks and it works. It's really, really common. So I think for any student pilots out there, I'd say like it is super common that you feel self-doubt, that you feel like imposter syndrome. Maybe I'm not cut out to be a pilot. Almost every pilot I know has felt that, and wanting to give up. So it's common. Just know that, and know that just about everybody who has a private pilot license felt that and overcome.
Right.
There's a bit of a uniqueness of being a pilot, and you know, not a lot of people do what we do.
Right.
But that's not because they can't. It's for other reasons. Either it's not for them, or they're scared of heights or something, or financially you can, because this is a very expensive hobby. So it's not for everyone for that one big reason.
Yeah, very much so.
But you might feel that because it's such a small community, it's such a small percentage of people who do it, that maybe there's something special about them. And there's not. I mean, like I like to think we're special people.
We like to think we're the 1%, but
We're the ones who just had the means to do it, just said, we're going to do it. Yeah. And went after it. And, it certainly wasn't natural for me. I wasn't like soloing at 5 hours.
same.
There's some people that can do that. And hey, tip my cap to that. But most people don't. Most people don't. I mean, you look at the average number of hours it takes to get a PPL, it's like 75.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's about where I was when I got mine. So, and no one's keeping score. It's like you're not competing against anyone. Uh, the learning mindset is really the key. Like I think it's easier for someone my age, being a midlife pilot. You kind of got through the experience of life. When you're younger, you tend to be a little bit more confident. Like, hey, especially if you're smarter than some of your friends, or you've accomplished more at a young age, you might feel like I can do this, and it's easy and I'll be able to handle it. But you got to approach it with a learning mindset. It'll humble you real quick.
It definitely did that for me. It damn near broke me. There were days where I was so frustrated, and my wife was super positive, like, you got this, you can do this. And I was like, that's helpful, but like, that wasn't it. And I was talking to my mom about how frustrated I was, and she went, hey, how old were you when you started walking? I was like, I don't know. She goes, well, you walked at around a year, but you got to realize from the time you were born till you started walking, you weren't. And that was a year. And before you started walking, when you thought you were ready, you fell many times. You'd stand, you'd wobble, and you'd fall on your butt. But guess what? Naturally in life, human beings have to walk. So you kept at it and you started walking. Same thing with talking. You don't talk till 15 months, and half of it is mumble jumble gargled in the first place. And then till you're about 3, you're not really putting together sentences. You're like a little drunk man running around. So if you look at life from that lens of everything that is necessary or that you get good at takes a lot of time, a lot of practice, and a lot of struggle, a lot of fumbling and falling. Think of your flight training the same. As long as you have the financial means and that's like you're not eating up the capital that you need to live to do so, stick with it. It'll click at some point, and then you'll join the 1% and call yourself a pilot. I think the statistic was something like 75% of people who get like a student pilot certificate don't finish and get their PPL certificate. And like you were saying, it's not because they're not capable. You get frustrated, life happens, financial things, you have kids, or you have like a oopsie kid where you're like, this was like, I now have money because my kids are off to college, and now you have a oopsie kid. You're like, oh God, here we go. I'm not flying anymore, So I get it. But if that's not one of your problems, trust me, you're missing out. Like, you're missing out.
Yeah, the perseverance is key. Perseverance is key. I mean, it is not a simple thing. I mean, I will tell everyone, and I say this not to brag, but it is the hardest test I've ever taken. Well,
Check ride.
I feel like accomplished a fair amount in my career and school and whatnot, but it was hands down the hardest test I've ever taken. But it feels so good to be able to have done that and
Yeah.
be able to prepare and know that you can do it
Right.
and you can handle it. Like you get drilled for 2 hours, oral questions, then you got to go up in the air. After that oral beating, you got to get in a plane and go and show maneuvers. Like it's pretty tough, but when you're prepared, your CFIs know when you're prepared. They won't lie deep because they look bad too if they land someone.
Yeah. It's tracked. Their student failure rate is tracked.
So it is certainly challenging, but very doable if you're focused and you're serious about it. Another tip I'd give is using different CFIs. Like one of the things that was helpful for me was I didn't do this on purpose. Some of it was I was very much like, I want to train, and if my CFI is not available, I'm going to train.
Oh, copy. Okay.
So I would end up going with other CFIs, but every CFI, just like every person, every teacher kind of teaches things in a slightly different way. They have a slightly different perspective. And I just remember everyone I went with would give me some other nugget. I'd be like, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, that's a good point. So I highly encourage folks to do that. When I started, I was recommended this CFI who was highly recommended and very busy, got on a schedule. We got started, and then he went to India for 3 weeks. He's like, oh, I'm going to India for 3 weeks. I was like, oh, man, it just got started. So he handed me to this other CFI, and I'm like, I'm going to keep training because I can't just, I did a few classes with him. Like, I got to keep going. I can't just like not fly for a few weeks. And the other CFI that he referred to me, he actually was an AMP as well. So he taught me a bunch about the mechanics of the plane. Like we go through, we do our pre-flight, and he's telling me how every single thing works.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's super cool. That's a whole other perspective.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend like switching CFIs, but just kind of flying with different people. Flying with Jason Miller at one time, he had a totally like he uses
That's
very
so
unique
awesome.
methods to how he teaches. If you can do it, and you belong to a school, like fortunately, I was a part of a pretty big school with a lot of instructors, so there were a lot of folks I could fly with.
That's very valuable. Everybody has something different to give. Nobody's necessarily better or worse than anybody else, but there are different ways of encoding a message that will be decoded different by someone. This conversation we have, when you go and talk to somebody about how it went, what stuck with you may be different than what stuck with me. As we move forward, before we land the plane, we've got this segment that I always work on. It's rapid fire questions, just kind of, different questions having to do with aviation. So if you could fly any plane, past or present, what would that be?
P-51 Mustang.
What piece of aviation tech or gear do you feel you can't live without?
The simple answer to that would be ForeFlight. I mean, ForeFlight is a must have. There's a Garmin version as well, but that's definitely one I can't live without. But I think the thing that I would most recommend is leveraging simulators. All right, the simulators, to me, every single flight into a new airport that I do it on the simulator first. And like this flight today, flew it on the simulator, landed about 7 or 8 times, right? Got the site pictures, different runways that I landed on. Yeah. And it's so realistic now. Like nowadays, it's so realistic that at times when I think back to flying it to Davis and that flight, I'm starting to remember, like, was that the simulator flight or was that my real flight?
That's awesome.
It's so realistic that, there's a lot of people think that we're living in an actual simulation. I don't know if that's the dirty truth to that, but these simulators, they have gotten so realistic with just the terrain and the views. That's a must-have for going to new airports, I'd say.
That's a big game changer. And that's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned that because, like I said, enough people sleep on simulators and say, oh, it's just a toy. It's a little more than a toy. So what is your favorite aviation-related acronym?
Acronym. Oh, a favorite acronym. I don't know why WAS keeps coming up to mind, even though I don't even know if I know what it is. I know it's an IFR acronym. I know it's like a precision one. I don't know what, there's just something about saying it. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. WAS. Like I just, when I become an IFR certified pilot, I want to keep using it because it just sounds cool.
What's your longest flight or cross country to date?
That would be Van Nuys.
Okay.
Van Nuys. I don't remember off the top of my head how long that was. From Reed Hillview but I gotta believe it was close to 200, maybe 180 under.
Okay, yeah, I could see it being, yeah, give or take at least.
Yeah. So that was my longest. That's one I mentioned. Really, that wasn't planned to be sunrise. Just like you said, like things don't always go the way you planned. So you have to be prepared for it. But more than anything, it was the dream flight that I mentioned, like the getting the plane on Friday morning, fly down with my son. My brother-in-law picked us up at Van Nuys. We went to Dodger Stadium for a game. Spent the night. And next morning we flew back. It was phenomenal. Like that's why I got a pilot license.
What's your biggest oh shit or near miss moment that you've had thus far in your, aviation career?
Ah, I had a dicey touch and go at Reed Hilvey, and Reed is an airport that's in the middle. If you're familiar with it, it's in the middle of the big city. Very controversial. It's supposed to shut down 2031. There's people trying to fight it. I grew up right on the approach path to 1-3, so my entire life as a kid, planes flying overhead. That's why I always wanted to be a pilot. But it's in the middle of a very congested area, and as a kid, also, I witnessed the aftermath of an accident in my neighborhood. Pretty tragic. 3 people passed, and when I was 12 years old. But it's in the middle of this residential area, so usually the touch and goes are they're allowed, but some people discourage them. But my CFIs were always very loose. Hey, we can do touch and goes, with CFIs, and it's so much more efficient when you're learning. You're doing pattern work,
Right.
but I tried a touch and go. I did 2, I think, and it was uneventful. And then on my third one, I just kind of lost control of the plane a bit. As I'm went full power, flaps up. I started to go off the center line, and I freaked out because the plane was wobbling. Um, yeah, I pulled the throttle back and just got it under control. But I mean, that could have easily turned into an incident,
Yeah.
like either just a runway incursion or I could have flipped. Um, it startled me, like it shook me. It probably, like, I bet if somebody was watching, they probably wouldn't have noticed too much. But for me,
Yeah, when you're feeling it.
when you're feeling like you don't have control of the plane, that feeling just
That's horrifying.
yeah. And I remember thinking, like, I'm gonna struggle to get back into play after this. And I forced myself to get back in after a few days, and just do some more pattern work. And it's fine, but it shook me for a bit. I started to doubt, like, hey, should I be doing this?
On the cross countries and such, what's your favorite in-flight snack?
Protein bars.
Oh, he's a healthy guy.
Protein bars just fill you up. I should have had one. And then I probably need them before I fly back. But um, if I don't have a snack after a flight, man, when I finish a flight, I'm like, I need a double burger or something. Because it takes a lot out of you. Like there is a physical element to it. Obviously, controlling the plane. I mean, the physical part is not so much, although I do feel it in my body, but the mental part of it, it's so draining mentally that burns as much calories as anything. So when I'm done with the flight, I am starving.
Yeah.
So you're right. Like on a longer flight, you gotta snack, because if you don't, I mean, you're gonna get hangry, and you don't want any other emotions going on when you're trying to land some new airport or something.
In terms of, places you've flown in to eat, what would you say has been your favorite place? What diner has the best food? Your $100 burger or
Yeah. So that's a tough one. Yeah, the Half Moon Vase is such a nice flight. But food wise, Petaluma's two-manor diner was pretty great. They had this. I'm trying to remember. It was kind of like the Filipino fruit, I believe, that they put on their pancakes. It's this purple thing. I don't remember.
Ube, I believe.
That's it. That's it. And that was pretty unique and fantastic. At Steak and Eggs there, it was phenomenal. It's such a great, cool cafe with all these memorabilia and photos. It was a great experience. A little chilly when we went, but that's my choice so far.
Another thing I want to circle back to is when you mentioned how flying is, it's like mental, emotional, some of it physical. Um, you said you're getting your high performance right now. In flying the 182 with the constant speed prop, and it's probably 235 horsepower, give or take. isn't that thing like wrestling a bear? Like you really have to use trim. If you don't use trim, you're gonna wear yourself out. I've never like, you know what I mean? So much in a 170, you're like, it's not a big deal. Little trim here, no. In that thing, you're either pushing down to not climb, or you're going to work with the trim wheel.
Yeah, well, it flies beautifully. I mean, it just feels like so powerful, compared to a 172 that you're flying, it's fast, just gets it's really smooth, kind of like it's like a van, it doesn't, you don't feel the bumps as much. But yeah, you're right. Like on round out and flare, man, you gotta pull back pretty hard. Like my instructor said, yeah, I'm gonna help you on the first one because it's like that ended is just so heavy, and I hear that I don't know if this is necessarily true, but the balance on 182 is just not perfect. Like it's just a little bit too nose head, right? So you really have to trim well and take some muscle. Like even when I was just pre-flight, when just like usually I was 72, I fold the bag, no problem. All you can do with one finger, 182 is like, oh man, this thing's got weight on it.
Yeah. I thought I was all the way back, and the instructor was like, "No, it's got another foot." I was like, "No, it doesn't." He's like, "Keep going." Whoop. I was like, "Oh crap, this is different." No, very very unique, and I think that's a great next step to challenge yourself in flying bigger, faster, more capable aircrafts. Which it's said that when you get your pilot license, the world becomes smaller, right? Because you talk about a comfortable weekend trip as maybe a 4-ish hour drive, maybe 5 at most. But now, if you were to say a 5 hour flight gets you to LA, like past LA, it'll get you over in, deep into Oregon, get you well into Nevada. You can go a lot of places. You can fly to Vegas from here. Vegas, I think, is 368 nautical miles from
It
Concord.
really does. I mean, I'm thinking about spring training maybe this year. I don't want to go spring training. Like that's a very doable flight to Arizona.
Yeah.
And not only that, you've got Sedona, which is supposed to be just a phenomenal. I mean, that's the default Microsoft simulator.
Yes. Where they train you in the little 152.
Exactly. But that airport that's like one of those must do. So
Epic, man. That's at the top of my list as well.
this year, I definitely am going to plan for multi-leg for some reason. What I'd like to do, if I can pull it off of work, is I'd love to just take a week off and get a flavor. We can just go somewhere like on, multi-legs, maybe flying like 3 to 4 hours a day, staying somewhere overnight, then go on your next leg and go into some other place, you know, multi-leg flight there. I hear these great stories of people doing that. I hear like just these great stories of meeting so many pilots and
Yeah.
people around the airport, and everybody just seems like it's such a welcoming, open community. Uh, I just everywhere every pilot I've met so far, um, every kind of airport I've gone into, you rarely find anyone who's like grumpy or just like I think there's something about flying that makes people happy and just very welcoming. But it's very familial.
Yes.
I've got no qualms about going by myself and going into these strange airports and just meeting people. I think it'd be great. I think that would make you a much better pilot. All the planning that you have to do, weather that you probably have to deal with. Maybe you're stuck somewhere for a couple of days, and that's why you got to give yourself enough time. You don't want to take any chances.
Right.
I've not have to worry about whether, other than, I mean, we do like basically, am I going to fly or not? But am I going to dodge thunderstorms and things like that? Like when you're flying in the Midwest, stuff like that, that's more a reality. And I hear a lot of the pilots from there when they talk about their stories, they're talking about dodging thunderstorms and like, I'm like, oh, like, I wouldn't even go, but, and these are not like super experienced pilots. They're pilots that have a couple 100 hours.
Right.
Like, well, that's very normal for them because it's not,
You'll never go.
right? So,
Yeah.
you're talking about going out to Oshkosh from here. That's a ways, and I guarantee there's probably going to be some weather on the way that you're going to have to think about. So that's going to make you a better pilot. That's all the planning, and as long as you're safe about it and smart about it, like it'll be a great experience.
There's a pilot in one of the clubs that I'm in who the club had to sign off for you to take the plane for a month, but he did a month trip with his wife in the 182, and they flew all the way to Maine and then came back the southern route like over there. So he spent a month and flew the entire country. And everybody, some people were like, "Oh well, what about the rest of us?" And we're like, one, you don't fly this plane. Two, isn't that what it's about? Like, wouldn't you kill to be able to do that type of trip? Like, how are you not happy for your buddy to be doing so? And everybody was like, you know what, you're right. Go have fun, enjoy, love it. Tell us all about it. I'm like, this this is it. This is why I'm in a flying club. And this club meets every Thursday at the hangar here in Concord, having a good time for 3 hours every single Thursday. And I'm like, this is like the mecca for a young pilot. You're hearing stories, getting experiences, flying in different types of planes. People are teaching you different things. It's a bunch of CFIs. 6 or 7 guys are airline pilots in the club. And it's just like, oh, there's people at every level. Like, I'm the most inexperienced pilot here. This is exactly where I want to be, you know?
Yeah, no, being around fellow pilots. I mean, you just learn to just listen to them talk, having conversations with themselves. When I was training, just sitting in the lounge, I would just sit there and be like, I'm gonna study here. I could study at home, do my ground up there, but I'm just do it here. So I just want to listen to people. I just want to ask questions. Like someone will reply, oh, what happened? Like what did you encounter? I hear them like debating something. I ask them about like just to hear the conversation, especially when you're first learning, like those things are invaluable. But they're just really interesting, really interesting. I've got a group at work. We use Slack to communicate. We created. If I found out there was another pilot, and turned out like there's like about 5 others, so we started a little Slack group. So we just every so often we just talk about stuff, and we just again you're speaking a language that not if anybody else is listening, if I have no idea what you're talking about, but um, just learning the different types of pilots too. Like one is a glider pilot, and he just posted videos of doing spins in a glider, which was insane. It was actually hard to do. It was really they had to try like 3 or 4 times. It was really hard to put a glider into a spin, apparently.
So as we go ahead and land the plane, in closing, are there any PSAs that you want to put out to other pilots, or any, other learning tips that you have from things you may have struggled with or had to go, how am I going to conquer this specific thing that's like a mental block, maybe?
Yeah, when I started 20 years ago, it was a different world. Like, there's so many tools at our disposal now that we didn't have back then. I mean, we had things like Microsoft Flight Simulator, but 20 years ago, that was pretty archaic, right?
Right.
But all the GPS functionality, like, it was rare. Back when I was flying, there was rare that anybody had any kind of GPS capabilities in the plane. iPads didn't exist. ForeFlight didn't exist. ADS-B didn't exist. So when you flew, you had to have your head on a swivel, and it was constant looking for traffic. And the world changed like in those 20 years, the pilots big time. Like so we have so many tools at our disposal. It could be overwhelming at times, but I think you need to know how to leverage your tools and leverage all the things like this, like podcasts, YouTubers. That's really what got me back in because I was I knew I wanted to get back in at some point, but I didn't have like that push. Right then was giving me that push. And then I just started to find these random YouTubers, TikTokers, and like making it really glorifying their pilot life. And I was like, that's what I remember. That's why I wanted to be a pilot. And they're just talking about just soaring over, at 10,000 feet over these mountain ranges and then just a weekend trip and the $100 per and I just started seeing these episodes and I thought, "I want that." That's what I wanted as a kid, and for whatever reasons, I put it aside and put it aside, and it just came back to me. So leverage though, there's a lot of really great YouTubers out there. There's a lot of great content, a lot of great educational content. I'm a person that learns more visually than by the book. So it's really hard for me to read something in a book and really understand it. I gotta see it. I gotta feel it, experience it. But and YouTube gives you that. You have all these every single maneuver that you're learning, you could find it someone teaching it on YouTube. So um leverage those resources because they're plentiful and to be efficient, like do all of as much of that as possible before you really get started. Do your ground beforehand. There's a lot of debate over that. Like some people don't. I have a friend who's a TPE actually, and he was like, I wouldn't recommend doing that. He's all for you, it's okay because you flew before, but you kind of have to learn and then do at the same time. And again, it comes back to your learning style. But even if you do your ground before, then just do it again when you're doing your live training. It's worth it because you can get most of that stuff for free. So there's just all of these resources that are out there and, leverage them. I wouldn't just like jump in and be like, all right, I want to start training right away. I really would leverage all of these free resources. Right. And then have a really good idea of like, what is the pace? What are the different things I need to learn? Maybe watch the different maneuvers, on YouTube. maybe learn the different concepts. At least like if you learned 50% of it, like even that, now you're really prepared when you come in. Like if you have passed your knowledge tests and stuff, even better. But now you're really prepared once you get it, and then you can really streamline and maximize your training experience. And then you really use your CFI for like, hey, I saw this video about this thing and I didn't totally understand it. It's like, oh, okay, well, let me explain it to you and let me go and let's go fly and show it to you. Then now you really understand it. Right. So the amount of resources are just incredible. Incredible. Like I can't even keep up with everything that's out there. But it makes learning much more within reach and just doable for folks.
Tools that you now have due to technology, the ability to train, to learn from others, to watch a video on something before you try it yourself. We have so many things at our fingertips that sometimes that can even be overwhelming. Like you
Yeah.
just get caught up going down that rabbit hole, and
Yeah.
that they call it. There's a term that people are using for it now. It's like analysis paralysis,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like
Yeah.
you just keep reviewing and reviewing and da da da. Look at it, enjoy it, take it for what it is, but then get out there and do it if possible. Don't just get caught up like being that person who's afraid to pull the trigger when the time comes. If, again, you're ready or in the situation for it and it's the right time.
Yeah.
Well, Manny, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to you out there listening. This was another insightful episode of becoming a pilot, the journey, the fun, the family, and of course, the growth, because that's what being a pilot is. It's about growing, and the aviation community, as Manny here said, is one that is extremely welcoming. So, to all of you guys thinking about becoming aviators and getting into it, welcome, go for it. Make sure you tune in. We are available on all podcast streaming platforms, as well as the video version on YouTube. You can follow us there, on Instagram as well, TikTok, X, wherever you get your media, we're there. Thanks for tuning in. May there always be wind beneath your wings. Peace.